Welcome back to the In the Lead show. My name is Jennifer Tsang, and this is episode number 17. On this podcast, I look to deliver tools, resources, new ways of thinking to everyday leaders. And today I get the pleasure to interview someone whom I've had the pleasure of getting to know over the last couple of years. Marie Logan was somebody who was in my coach training program that I went through back in 2020. And we just developed a really great relationship. We do a lot of buddy coaching together. We use each other as resources. And she recently pulled me into a program around positive intelligence. And it's all around building your mindfulness muscle and helping you to discover and develop and master your own mind and your own way of thinking. And I feel like this is such a huge, valuable resource for anyone, no matter where you are in an organization, where you are in your life. How can we have better mastery over our own mind and our own way of thinking and discover ways that we can help to flip those ways of thinking? So think about your mind as having these pathways. And the more that we think a certain belief or we do a certain thing, it deepens that pathway in our mind. So it becomes more like a habit. And positive intelligence is a set of practices that helps you build that mental fitness and helps people to develop and master their own mind. So it's used to shift your mind from some self-sabotaging thoughts, beliefs, mindsets to optimal performance using simple and proven neuroscience-based techniques. Developing this mastery is the greatest determinant for achieving professional success and happiness. Now, I myself went through this positive intelligence program. It's about 6 weeks. And in the future, I hope to be able to be someone who can help facilitate those group experiences, but it's around teaching you these simple practices that you can do on a daily basis that helps open your mind to new ways of thinking. So I'm going to interview Marie today. Marie and I went through this program together, and she is a facilitator of this program. And she is a certified professional coach and founder of My Coach Marie, who specializes in helping build mental fitness and utilize their strengths to find greater success and personal happiness in service of more effective leadership, diversity, equity, and inclusion. She has served in leadership roles in higher education for 30 years and now brings that wealth of insight to coaching. She utilizes the positive intelligence framework in her coaching practice and personally endeavors to practice the sage perspective, surfing that wave every day. Now, that will make more sense once you watch the show, but it's all about how do we surf that wave when we get triggered or we're in a situation where we might have a reaction towards someone or something. How can we surf that wave instead of allowing the wave to kind of crash on us and take us down or suck us under the water? Finding new ways to have a different experience and relationship with ourselves, and then extending that out to other people. And again, this is so important for leaders, especially today when you're managing large teams. You are helping manage and lead them through really difficult situations. COVID has been one. There have been many, difficult situations that we've all had to kind of come through over the last couple of years. And how can you maybe surf that wave a little bit better so that you're not feeling like you're getting tugged under or thrashed around by those waves? So I hope that this conversation today provides you with some insights into how you might be able to use positive intelligence in your everyday life. And before we get started, I wanted to invite you to have a conversation. If you are interested in leadership coaching, I also specialize in leadership coaching. I work with people around mindfulness and actually helping build this mindfulness, mental fitness, something that I'm very, very passionate about. So if you're interested in having a more robust conversation with me, you can reach out to me through my website, www.coachwithinsight.com. And welcome to the show. Welcome back back to the In the Lead show. My name is Jennifer Tsang, and today I am here with Marie Logan to talk about positive intelligence. Welcome to the show, Marie.
Thanks, Jen. I'm really glad to be here.
Yeah, me too. So, just a little context, Marie and I have known each other for the last couple of years. We went through a coach training program together, and we've been doing a lot of buddy coaching together. So, we've gotten to know each other pretty well over the last couple of years. And I'm really excited to have you join the show today because we also went through this positive intelligence program together a couple of months ago. So, I'm really excited to dive into this and provide a lot of value to the listeners based on what we've learned. But before we get into that, I would love for you to give some context to the listeners about who is Marie.
Oh, gosh. Marie is someone who's worked in higher education for 30 years. I've been in leadership roles that whole time. And a couple of years ago, I was challenged by some work that I was doing and realized that I needed some coaching. I really needed some coaching training. And so I enrolled in that program you were just talking about and got trained as a coach. And now I've discovered that that is truly my passion. I just love being of service to people. It just brings me so much joy and helping them find success.
Yeah, that's great. And I've also found a lot of value out of positive intelligence as well. So maybe you can help us understand what is positive intelligence?
So after I finished my training as a coach, I decided to just keep on doing more education in coaching. And a coach I knew recommended this program and said, "You've got to check this out. This is just amazing." So I did. And that's when I invited you and a couple of others to join that pod with me. And we went through the initial program and it just blew my mind. It is a methodology that I just had no idea was even out there. I've always believed in strengths. I've always believed in emotional intelligence and those sorts of things to, help leaders be really effective. And then when I discovered this, I couldn't believe it. It's this science-based practice. And the idea is that it helps you develop this kind of self-mastery of your thoughts. And when you can do that, you can kind of create more mental fitness and resilience in your life. Helps you
Yeah.
deal with things positively, rather than letting that inner critic and that those thoughts that you have that are kind of automatic. It keeps them kind of at bay and helps you redirect.
Yeah. Yeah. I look at it almost like mindfulness, just building more mindfulness around kind of our own thoughts, feelings, presence, like what's happening inside of us, what's happening to us and with us. And it just gives you that deeper, richer sense of self and what's kind of coming up on a daily basis. And I know I personally talk to a lot of clients about getting really nuanced with your feelings, emotions, thoughts, actions, that there's more than just what we kind of observe typically on a daily basis. There's a lot more going on there. And I feel like this is a great practice to help you get that nuance and get more detail, to get a more richer experience out of life. That's kind of how I see it.
Exactly. What I've found, Jen, in my practice and also in my work with leaders in higher education is that the people who tend to be the most successful are
Mm.
those who are the most self-aware.
Yeah.
And it's not just like emotional intelligence,
Right.
it's being self-aware and being able to have that sense of purpose and values and be able to recognize when they're
Mhm.
on that path and when they're derailing,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. I think beyond emotional intelligence, because I think that is kind of a broad word and kind of gets used a lot. But for me, it's more about how do I manage and regulate myself, even at the
Mhm.
most basic level. It's like we have again a lot of inputs coming into us. We're sensing things, we're feeling things, there's hormones, there's all kinds of stuff going on. Ho but are we allowing those things to kind of take control, or do we have some sense for what's actually happening, and can we develop some sort of control over what's happening? with us. And to me, I have also worked with some really great leaders who have mastered those things, that when times get tough, right? And there's a high stress situation, are they the ones who are, completely coming undone? Are they lashing out at people, blaming, and really just whatever's happening inside? I'm a big believer is that's gets projected out. So if you can master those things and create more of that calmness internally, people sense that around you, and people start to really feel that, and you can build really great teams and really great spaces for people. Even in coaching and coaching practice, right? It's really helpful to create that calming sense for people so that they feel safe and they feel like they can be their whole selves.
Yeah, what's one of the interesting things you said there was related to all of the different chemicals that are going on in your brain.
Mhm.
Part of what the research that goes into positive intelligence is neuroscience
Yeah.
and positive psychology and cognitive behavioral psychology and performance science, which includes things like emotional intelligence. But one of the things that's so fascinating to me is the neuroscience, because not only is it about the neuroplasticity, the fact that
Mhm.
your brain, you can keep changing it all the way into your 90s. And I'll tell you, I can attest to that because I have a client who's 78 and
Oh,
she
wow.
is still just completely discovering all kinds of new things and
Yeah.
and developing new habits, and is just kind of amazed at what this is doing for her. So neuroscience, the other piece of that is those brain chemicals. So
Mhm.
there's different parts of your brain that are actually engaging when you're having those negative thoughts versus those positive thoughts. And so when you're having those types of negative mindset patterns, it's actually in your survival brain, back in your amygdala. And
Mhm.
when that is being activated, you're actually releasing cortisol into your bloodstream. And
Yeah.
cortisol, as we all know, is the stress hormone. And
Mhm.
so no wonder we're not effective when we're doing that, right?
Mhm.
So if when you then you mentioned, sort of training yourself to get control of that, and in positive intelligence we call that self-command.
Yes.
And I'll be glad at some point in our conversation here to share one of those practices because it's pretty amazing. Mindfulness, people tend to um, train to do mindfulness. They have to sit, meditate. They've got to be in a quiet room, sitting in front of their special place, and then they meditate, and it takes, a fair amount of time, right, to do it. Now, the beautiful thing is that what PQ reps are, and that's what we call them here in positive intelligence, is PQ reps. PQ is positive intelligence quotient. It's just a way of measuring how strong your mental fitness is.
Mhm.
So you do these PQ reps, and they're just literally like the building blocks of meditation. You get a lot of the benefits, but you don't have to be an expert in meditation. You don't have to have trained in meditation. So
And you don't have to, sitting, maybe sitting in a really quiet place doesn't make you feel comfortable, or maybe you don't have the time, right? Or maybe you have a lot of
exactly.
kids and you're just very busy. What I find actually, Marie, is I always look for the stressors in my life to practice these things. So for instance, like I'm in the car and maybe I'm in traffic. I immediately go, okay, Jen, I know this is a place where you are going to want to get very angry, frustrated. All these things are getting triggered in you. How do I kind of take a stop and just start doing some of those reps and just try and get really present and try to focus my attention away from the external things that are really triggering me and activating me, and trying to get back into my body, back into my presence right here. And I notice it only takes a few minutes. And that's the wild thing, is like you don't need to sit and meditate for like 4 or 5 hours. It's like you could
Yeah.
just sit for maybe 5, 10 minutes and get a really great effect and bring down that that trigger, those chemicals, that response that you're having. So it's
Exactly.
amazing because you don't need the perfect. Sometimes meditation feels like you have to have the perfect kind of situation, right, for it to happen. Where here, I mean, yeah, you can be doing this anywhere.
Well, what's so cool is, we just talked about how all those bad chemicals that are unhelpful
Hmm.
to us get
Yeah.
released when we're having those negative thoughts. When we can flip it, this is basically rewiring our brain so
Yeah.
that when we have those habitual thoughts, they're using neural pathways that are well traveled, right? They're habits. And what we're doing through doing PQ reps is we're actually learning to flip it and cause new neural pathways to either form or start being used more frequently. And so the way I like to put it is like those new neural pathways are turning into superhighways
Mhm.
and the old ones are getting decommissioned. And so what happens is it's your prefrontal cortex that you're engaging when you're flipping it to these more positive thoughts. And when you do that, you get different brain chemicals being released. It's beautiful. I mean,
Yeah.
it's really awesome science. And it's
Yeah.
just so cool to watch it happening. So, for example, I got a call from my boss the other day with some really big news that I think in the past it probably would have derailed me. I would have been so upset, and I probably would have taken a few days to recover from this news. I knew, though, having gone through the PQ program, I said, I need to do some PQ reps. So I went, I sat down, I immediately did a bunch of, I did more than you really have to do, to have a basic flip of your thinking, because this was a really big thing. This was a big weight that I was trying to lift. And it worked. It really worked. I ended up taking my dogs for a walk and feeling even joyful. I started being able to see, oh my goodness, this change. Like I see the opportunities and possibly even the gifts in this change. And I wasn't afraid anymore. And so that's the beauty of it. But you're
Yeah.
just sitting in a meeting and someone, let's say someone who typically triggers you, says something that you start to feel that feeling coming up, right? That's what happens. I always ask my clients, where do you feel it? And some people, they say this is their gut. Some people say it's in my throat, and some people say, oh, it's in my shoulders, and I just get my jaw, whatever it is, right? And so think about where you get that feeling. All you have to do is notice it. That's the first thing. You notice it. And in positive intelligence, what you're also going to learn to do is notice which saboteur. That's the language that is of positive intelligence. There are 10 saboteurs. And so you'll learn to recognize which saboteur, which kind of inner critic is the judge. Or there's others like the avoider or the pleaser or the hyper vigilant or the hyper rational. There are 10 characters. And so you learn to recognize which one is talking to you and which thoughts you're having, and then you stop it. So you can do it this quickly. Would you like me to lead you through one?
Sure. Let's go for it.
Okay, so here's how it works. Let's just say we are in a meeting, all of a sudden we hear this thing and we're like, okay, you just need to take a couple seconds. Now we'll do this for a few seconds, but you can do it literally as little as 10 seconds and you can turn it around.
Mm.
So just your listeners can do it along with us. Just rub your fingers together with such attention that you can feel the ridges on all the fingertips. And then touch all of your fingertips together, one hand touching the other hand. Again, with just enough pressure to feel the ridges and all the imperfections in the fingertips. While you're doing this, be sure that you're breathing. Pay attention to your breath. And then just run your fingertips down the palm of your other hand very gently and notice all of the sensations. Now that would be enough, but you can also stop for a second and listen to the sound that you can hear that's the furthest away. And then listen to the sound that is the closest. It might even be your breath. That's it.
That's it. Wow. I don't know about anybody listening, but for me, I mean, I'm instantly relaxed. I feel very, and it's funny that you said towards the end, you're like, it could be your breath. I was thinking, well, I can hear my breath pretty loud. And I was like, oh, that's pretty loud in my ear. Um, but yeah, I mean, it's something so simple, but I think that for me, I've noticed it's about, I like that you mentioned noticing because for me, I was thinking, well, these things would be great, but how do maybe I don't know when I'm getting stressed. Maybe I'm not fully aware of like what the actual triggers are. And I can only share from my own kind of therapy experience, what started way before this, which is about just start noticing as often as you can, and you'll start to notice patterns or themes or things that come up around the same things, and you'll start to notice things more quickly the more you start really kind of just opening up all of your senses to everything that's going on in a given moment. And these types of exercises can help you do that. But and it's also important, I think, to really notice just what's that trigger, because as we get into the saboteurs, and I really want to get into those because those are really fascinating to me, is it can be tricky. It can be really, really tricky. There's some obvious ones, right? Like I'm in a traffic jam. A lot of people get really stressed with that. Or airplanes, right? A lot of people get very anxious and nervous on airplanes. Things like that are really obvious. But it's fascinating because when I was going through this program, the biggest epiphany for me was the very small ways that those saboteurs and those things sneak in and start to kind of change that mindset without me even being aware. Somebody who's done therapy for many, many years knows herself pretty well. I was like mind blown. I was like, oh my gosh, I thought I knew myself inside and out. And there's this one little tiny thing that I didn't ever notice, that as I started really noticing and doing more and more of these reps, it like became so clear to me. And I was like, oh my God, like it's really amazing work. I mean, frankly, I found so much value. So let's go back to the saboteurs because you mentioned that.
Sure.
Tell me, like, what are saboteurs and how does positive intelligence kind of look at saboteurs?
Well, the saboteurs are they're they're those ways that you think and the thoughts that you have. There's actually a free assessment, by the way, on the
Mm,
positiveintelligence.com website. You can take the free assessment and they'll send you your results, and your results actually give you a whole page of everything about the saboteurs. So the saboteurs, in a basic way of saying it, they actually are your greatest strengths that are
mm,
taken too far.
yeah.
So let's just say that you are really super high achieving, which is awesome, right? Until you become, you start listening to those thoughts about achieving and that you're not worth it if you're not worthy if you don't achieve. I mean, it can flip really quite quickly, right? So the things that have been your greatest strengths as you grew up, and they also helped you, they protected you and made you strong, as a
Mhm.
child, as you're growing up, like you used these things.
Yeah.
The judge learning to discern, right, is a very important thing for a child to do, right? It can also turn into your greatest enemy.
Yeah.
And the judge actually is one that everybody has. Everybody's got the judge. And then there's some accomplice saboteurs that uh, play right along with the judge, and then they work together in ways that are not very helpful. But
Yeah.
what the judge does is instead of helping you just discern what's safe and what's not safe and that sort of thing, as an example, it gets you fixated on what's wrong. And that was great when we were out living with saber-toothed tigers, right? That was super important to
Oh, yeah.
understand where danger was,
Yeah.
right? And to be able to discern that and take quick action. But now what happens is we tend to allow this to get activated, and we're just constantly focusing on what's wrong. We're wired to do that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so unfortunately, though, it causes a lot of stress and unhappiness in our lives.
Yeah. And I'm glad we're having this conversation because I recently had a conversation with my therapist around these similar. So she operates in the IFS model, which is very similar to this in a lot of ways. And I think what I heard you say was that it's a balance. Just like anything, right? Too much of something is probably not a good thing. So it's For me, the way I looked at saboteurs was, okay, that's there. I see that my personal saboteurs are victim and I think hypervigilant are my two biggest saboteurs. So how can I look at those two saboteurs as tools for me to use? They have strengths, but I also know there's a shadow side to them. And if I let go too far, let the victim take over too much, it can have some negative consequences on me and get me into a negative mindset. So,
Mhm.
how do I leverage the gifts and the tools and the strengths that come along with that saboteur? Is through a lot of that mindfulness and a lot of those PQ reps and really kind of developing that noticing of when they come up and what they look like and understanding them more deeply to I mean, and that's where it gets into therapy and where we were going with IFS is understanding where they come from. You don't have to go that far, but just noticing, what's there and maybe what their purpose is. Like, how are they trying to help you? Because I believe that they are trying to help you. Those parts of you are trying to keep you safe in some way. But what kept us safe as a child doesn't always keep us safe as an adult. So I think it's that discernment. And I think I also wanted to call out that in leadership, especially, that is like the skill that if leaders want to develop and hone, it's that discernment piece and really getting a good command of that judge because that one can go quickly in a negative direction. And we can use that and weaponize it and against others and ourselves. So how can we really use that judge in a powerful way to help us discern things for our teams, for our families, if we're an entrepreneur in a business? We need to make lots of decisions. And if we have a really strong judge that we can use as that discernment piece, I see it as a huge gift and a huge blessing if we can keep it in
Until
balance, right?
right, until it flips to the negative. Right.
Exactly. And
Yeah,
I
and
think that's
so
the work.
yeah, and so what we're trying to do is we're trying to develop some self-command that will
Mhm.
so we practice, right, this way of flipping so that we can rewire our brain to take that more positive approach. And the more positive approach, there are five sages. There are five
Mm.
sage powers.
Yeah,
And so that's what you're really looking to develop.
right.
So, for example, empathy is really the biggest one.
Mhm.
Is how can you have true, deep empathy for yourself first,
Mhm.
and then for those who you're feeling like you're judging, or
Yeah.
you're having some of those saboteur thoughts that they're affecting that relationship.
Yeah. I always say a lot. I think a lot of things in life are an inside out approach, but I believe leadership especially is an inside out approach. I've noticed in my own workplace, there's a lot of people who want to just like manage people. And it's like all about, that control or that. And it's not about like, how do I control myself first? Because if I'm not in control, I don't know how I expect to have control over others or how to kind of manage this business. So I think it's just such a powerful tool to kind of really start looking internally and figuring out ways and developing those new neural pathways, like you mentioned, to try and flip those things. Because I think you'll notice again, like it's not always the big stuff. The big stuff sometimes you can cherry pick and it's kind of easy to see, but it's even those little tiny little nuances that you would be really surprised on a daily basis how they flip really easily. And I want you to also talk about because this is something that we learned about in the program that I know was a big kind of notice for me was they talk about the lies that the saboteurs tell. And again, that was a big one for me. And I think I shared this on a previous podcast, but in the very beginning of the podcast, I used to listen to all my shows because I told myself it'll make you better to hear yourself and figure out like, what are you doing wrong? What can you tweak to make better? It was disguised as it's a good thing, right? You want to be better. So this will help you get
Yeah,
better. But I noticed how quickly it was turning into this like opportunity to just annihilate myself and go, like, just pick myself apart. And then I had to go, wait a second, hold on. But I heard the whole story. The saboteur saying, no, it'll be great. It's awesome. Like, this will be good for you. And
yeah.
then I could literally see the flip of like, no, that's terrible. You're awful. Horrible.
Mhm.
I could see that whole like process happening and it was mind blowing to me. So I think my point in all that is like don't just pay attention to the big stuff too, also start to notice those nuances. So, in that, maybe you could tell maybe a little bit more about what are some of these lies that
Yeah.
the saboteurs might tell to help kind of keep you in that area that we're trying to flip?
Yeah. So, for example, if you found that you were a controller, I want to rephrase that because we are not our saboteurs. These are just
Yes.
aspects of the way that we think. So, your controller saboteur that
Mhm.
you use in your thinking is telling you either you're in control or you're out of control, right? That there's
Black
only
or white.
one or the other,
Yeah.
right? And if I work hard enough, this is what the controller is trying to convince you. If I just work hard enough, I can control the situation and it will go my way. And I should. Others want me to take control. They need me to
Mhm.
take control, in fact. I'm
Yeah.
doing them a favor,
Yeah.
and nobody tells me what to do. I know what to do and I need to take control. And so
Mhm.
those thoughts to someone who has a tendency for those thoughts, they're very comforting, right, on the
Mhm.
surface until they're not, because then they have really high anxiety, right, when things don't
Mhm.
go their way.
Yeah. And for leaders or relationships, I mean, imagine, right? Your leader comes to you and says, no, it must be this way. Like, think about how that's also impacting others. It doesn't just have a profound impact on you,
Right.
you're now impacting others. And people don't, I mean, I know I personally don't want to, you know, engage with somebody like that who's like, no, it must be this way. If I have an opinion, you're not really hearing people. You're not
Right.
creating safe spaces for them to be themselves. So I can see how that would get in the way. And I love your examples because those are examples of small kind of narratives that we all have that
Mhm.
might be indicators, right? If you're asking, like, well, how do I start indicating my saboteurs and what they have to stay, start looking for things like that. Like, that's probably a really common one, Marie, that a lot of people have where do you have really rigid thinking? Is it like it's either right or wrong? Like, I know, I know best.
And how about the pleaser? The
Oh,
pleaser thoughts, the pleaser
yeah.
saboteur is, really feeling that they're a good person by putting their own needs ahead of others,
Mhm.
and but then they start feeling really upset, really, because, people aren't noticing and they feel like, well, wait a minute, it makes me feel bad because people aren't noticing, right? But
Well,
they
that's
try
the
to tell
accomplice,
themselves,
right? The
sorry.
accomplice, that's an
Exactly.
victim would probably be an accomplice to a pleaser, right? Where it's
I
like,
think,
well,
yes. Yeah. And they tell themselves, oh, I don't expect anything in return. It would just be a better place in this world if everyone would just behave this way. Right. But the problem is that isn't how it works. They end up feeling a lot of resentment
Mhm.
towards people.
Yeah.
They lose sight of their own needs and they rescue. And, none of those behaviors end up really helping leaders.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, you mentioned earlier about the sages, and I wanted to dive a little bit deeper on that. So, we talked about the saboteurs, right? There are these things that come up in us, and um, but then you talked about these sages. So, how do the sages and the saboteurs kind of play together?
The sages are those ways of thinking that you learn to activate. So the sage perspective is really taking any situation that were to happen. Like, let's just take, for example, my big news that I got when my boss called. I could have gone very easily into, oh my gosh, I'm a victim, poor me, this is just going to be horrible. It's just an organizational change. This is the worst thing ever. I knew this was going to happen. I could start activating all kinds of saboteur thoughts. Instead, by doing these PQ reps, I was able to open up that part of my brain that said, wait a minute, let's surf this wave, right? Let's
Mm.
get on that wave. Let's become the best surfer ever. Like, instead of trying to control, that's one of mine. Okay, well, I can just figure out, who do I need to talk to? What can I do? How can I have influence over how things are going to change, right? That's one way I could have gone. Instead, I said, okay, what are the gifts and opportunities of this situation? So you learn to activate this sage perspective, and then you figure out which sage power you need to actually develop more so that you can kind of, if you imagine that this problem or this situation you're facing is like a weight that you need to lift, then you think about which power would I need. So it could be, for example, there's empathize, there's activate, there's explore, there's innovate, and there's navigate. So many of those actually come into play. So navigate, for example, you want to really tune into what are your values and your direction in life. Like, what do you really care about? And that's going to help you figure out the right way to go, right? What's going to be most productive for you. Empathize, think about feeling empathy for yourself that you're going through this situation, not feeling pity and feeling sorry for yourself, but really empathizing and being like, this is tough. Yeah. And that's okay. Like, take care of yourself, right? And empathize with all the other people who are also in this situation, people who are also dealing with it, perhaps from another point of view, Then, exploring is all about figuring out or innovating, exploring and innovating, figuring out the next best steps. What might be good? Okay, so this thing is, it is true, whatever this news is. So let's imagine that we say, yes, you know what? There is one little piece of that I really love. And it's this. This is this 10% that I really love of that. I don't like all of it. I might even hate the rest of it. But there's some little tiny piece that I can love. So I figure out what that is. And then I say, okay, I love that. And what if I built on that? And let's see what ideas are sparked from that little piece that I like. And that's where you can start getting creative. And then it all starts snowballing. That's the beauty of it, right? And then you start feeling better and better and more energized. I honestly almost felt euphoric. Took my dogs for a walk after that at the beach. And I just was like, oh my goodness. The sunset is so beautiful. And I just found myself like being so happy. I was talking to all these people on the pathway and, on the beach. And I just was like, I just got really big news. And I'm like, how can I be so happy? But it's like I started seeing all of those potential positive gifts and opportunities from this change.
Yeah.
And that's just such a different response than I might have had, a year ago.
Yeah. Yeah. I love, because we choose, right? And that's where the discernment comes from, is we do choose what we focus on. It feels almost like you're moving from this really narrow kind of perspective and you're really almost broadening, kind of opening up to kind of all the different possibilities. Because if we have that very rigid, right, wrong, black, white thinking, like the possibilities are a lot fewer, right? Like we don't see the possibilities. We tend to focus on the, oh my gosh, this is bad. This is horrible. I'm going to, whatever's going to happen, it's going to be bad. It's not good. And we have a choice, right? There is that moment where we do have that choice of, do I focus on this or do I focus on this? And it's not also, I'll stop there, but I'll ask you a question. So the naysayer who might be saying, well, aren't you just kind of dismissing those feelings that are there? The other 90% that goes, yeah, I mean, there's a lot there that maybe is really upsetting to you. Are you just kind of putting blinders on and saying, that stuff doesn't matter and I'm just going to kind of push it aside? Or what do you say to that person who might be saying, well, what about all that other 90% that you aren't paying attention to?
It's learning to discern what those thoughts really are. Are they real? They may feel real, but are they real? And you certainly do want to respond to the things that are real and might be presenting some kind of danger. But you don't want to let the saboteur thoughts just run wild, right? Yeah. So that's really what it's about, is figuring out what's what. And then learning to surf the situation, or like a sailor, you've got a wind coming at you in a certain direction. You're not going to be able to change that, right? So you have a choice. You can either do nothing and your sails flapping all over and you're going nowhere, right? Or you can tack 45 degrees this way, 45 degrees that way, and you make progress forward, right? But as a leader, it's really our responsibility. Leaders need to be that steady sailor, who is making conscious choices that are
Yeah.
more positive and productive and encouraging for their teams. So
Yeah.
the self-command is really a key.
Oh, it's so key. And I love that you said conscious, because that's one of my 4 C's of leadership, is that I feel like we need to develop that consciousness is so important. But one other thing you said that made me really smile, because I think I've talked about it on a previous podcast, but I think about it a lot, is my therapist told me the discernment is all about, is it real or is it true? Now, there's a big difference. Real means it feels real to you, and it can be really, really real. You can be really upset, it can feel
Mhm.
really painful, it can feel almost like it's really true. But that self perspective, you take that step back, you have to look at it. And that's where the discernment comes in. Okay, this feels real to me, and it might not be true. And I think you would be surprised how often that is actually the case, is like we feel like it's true, but it's more feels real to us than it is actually true. Because think about it, in the news that you got, there can be millions of possibilities and probabilities, right? It's not
Mhm.
a lot of things in life, right? Aren't just it's either this or that. Like there's a lot in there. And acknowledging, I think that's the part that really rang true for me, was acknowledge that it feels real to you. Like,
Mhm.
yeah, that scares me, or that hurts, or that upsets me in some way. But being able to have that self perspective to step back and say, and I can see that that probably isn't true. Now, what can I do about it? I think
Exactly.
that distinction is so important. And I love your metaphor with the sailor. I think that's a great metaphor for leaders, is because that's what you are doing, right? You are directing the sails, you are guiding the team, and having that
Mhm.
compass, like you were mentioning earlier about that, or
Yeah.
North Star, or whatever
Yeah.
metaphor you want to use for it. Like, what am I aligned to? Like,
Yes.
if I know I come back to that a lot when I'm feeling this, like, oh, it feels real, but it might not be true. I go back to my North Star. What's my purpose? What am I aligning myself to? And that helps in that discernment piece. And it also helps, I've noticed, for me at least, with the saboteurs, I feel like a lot of times they actually want that self perspective. They want you to kind of take, I always say, can take control of the bus. You want to be in the front seat of the bus, kind of driving as a big higher self. And those saboteurs are there in the background, but they don't have to be in control. They don't have to be. And I don't even know if they want to be perfectly honest. I just wonder if, like, in the system, this goes in internal family systems, but I just wonder if, like, they just do that by default. Like, if we just, our neural pathway is so deep that it just defaults that. But I really wonder if that's what
These
is
are
actually really desired, you know?
Yeah, these are habitual patterns, and I'm not a psychologist, so I can't
Yeah.
really comment on that. But I would say that yeah, they're habits.
Yeah. Powerful habits that you can also flip, like you said, and we have more choice and control than I think we realize. Um, that's great. So, thank you, Marie, for exploring this today. And, is there any last thoughts or tidbits you want to leave with the listeners around positive intelligence, and how maybe they can start maybe implementing some of these things into their daily lives?
Well, if you're really really interested, check it out. Positiveintelligence.com. That's your place for everything positive intelligence. But even if you don't want to do a whole, for example, 6-week program, just start with those little things. Just
Mhm.
start doing a few little PQ reps. And I have clients who have not chosen to go through the program, and I've just taught them to do PQ reps. They're already finding some benefit from that. And if you practice that for 6 weeks, it takes 6 weeks to change a habit. So even
Mm,
just starting to do that, I think your listeners really will see some benefit like we
yeah,
have.
I agree. And it'll be interesting. And if anyone is listening and they do some of these exercises and want to leave a comment or reach out and let me know how it's going, I would love to, because it is really fascinating, because I'm telling you, the more you do it, like, even the smallest little things you start to notice, you're like, wow, like, I didn't even know I was thinking that. I didn't even know I was doing those things. And the more you start tuning in and kind of really getting just building that muscle, you start to notice all the little things too. It's kind of crazy. I was like, wow, I didn't even know this about myself.
Yes, and on the website, the author of the book Positive Intelligence and the person who did all the research on this, Shirzad Shamin, he actually leads two free um, PQ reps. One is 15 minutes long, and the other's just 5. So you can get a
Right.
really good sense of what they are.
That's awesome. Well, I'll definitely make sure to provide a bunch of links in the show notes for anybody who's interested in following up, as well as the assessment. I think that's really interesting to take, just to kind of notice what are maybe some of your top saboteurs that come up. That'll give you some good data to start as you're noticing and listening in. Like, oh, hey,
Absolutely.
what's coming up? Um, but thank you, Marie. It was such a pleasure talking to you today and getting to, just talk shop and also talk a little bit about PQ. It's always fun, and I know you've been on an adventure over the last few months, and I know you've been diving deep into this work. So I know you've been having profound results. So I appreciate you sharing that with us today.
Well, thank you for asking me on, Jen. I really enjoyed being able to share this with your listeners. My clients absolutely love it, and you are, I think, doing everyone who's a leader a huge service by exposing them to this topic.